Hello, 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 and welcome to episode 297 of Stand Up. Two awesome guests joining me again today. I've got Jonathan Cohn, who is a longtime journalist and author of The 10-Year War, Obamacare, and the Unfinished Crusade for Universal Coverage. Such a good book. I talk with him about it today. And also, candidate for lieutenant governor for Virginia. I saw his ad on Twitter. It was so good. I reached out to him. He agreed to join me in conversation. Sean Perryman joins me for the first time. I'm Pete Dominic. Won't you stand up with me right now? Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining me here. I hope you are hanging in there. I now know more about Tiger Woods' accident than when I'm going to get the vaccine or anything else that's much more important or consequential. I mean, when I saw that Tiger Woods had a bad car accident, I was like, wow, that's terrible. Did anybody get killed? No? Okay, well, I hope he's all right. And then I tried to move on, but I was hit over the head every single place I went, from tweets to Polo with Friends, the Marco Polo app it's my dad. Okay, my dad didn't say anything about Tiger Woods, but I hope he's okay. I'm surprised by the amount of coverage. Even Chris Hayes covered it on MSNBC, and something tells me that he really probably didn't want to, but they're like, just mention the thing about Tiger Woods, and everybody is a winner. Well, a lot happened yesterday, and I've got a lot to talk with you about here today in this first segment of the show, and thank you very much for tuning in and telling your friends, all of the new subscribers, many of you editing your pledge, your subscription up, more money, and that's awesome. Really, really helpful and appreciated a great deal. Hope to see you Thursday night at our hangout. Still to come this week, I've got Dr. Aaron Carroll and, of course, comedian Christian Finnegan and more. As always, would love to hear from you, who you'd like me to have on the show, and join us on the Discord platform anytime. All right, let's get to the news, shall we? This first segment, I like to call it the last 24 hours of news. Lots of important headlines. I'll go through, play some sound bites for you. But first, from Texas, 4 members of the board at the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, apparently not so reliable, huh? The acronym is ERCOT, close to Epcot, but not at all Epcot. They are resigning, folks. 4 of these members are resigning following last week's blackouts that left millions in the state without power amid brutal winter weather, boiling water to dump in their potty. And the suffering hasn't been limited to Texas. Roughly a quarter of Louisiana's population was still without access to clean drinking water as of Monday, a week after a storm tore through that state, exposing fragile infrastructure in several of the state's largest cities. So shout out to all our friends in Texas and Louisiana who are listening. Love you guys and hope to hear from you this week more. Okay, so lots happening on Capitol Hill on Tuesday in the last 24. Testimony before Congress with 3 former top Capitol security officials and the chief of the Washington, D.C. police, who blamed federal law enforcement and the Defense Department for intelligence failures ahead of the January 6th insurrection on our Capitol, as well as for slow authorization of the National Guard as the violence escalated. Elsewhere in the Capitol, President Biden's cabinet picks were on the spotlight. Congresswoman Deb Holland, the Interior Secretary nominee, would be the first Native American cabinet secretary, said she would enact President Biden's agenda, not my own agenda, when pressed on her opposition to fossil fuels. Mr. Biden's nominee for Health Secretary Xavier Becerra pledged to work to restore faith in public health institutions as Republicans sought to paint him as a liberal extremist. And Neera Tanden's nomination to lead the offices of Management and Budget is still teetering, but the Senate confirmed Linda Thomas Greenfield, who is a veteran diplomat, to become the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. That reporting comes from the NewYorkTimes.com. And now let's get to those hearings on Capitol Hill, the investigation beginning into what happened on January 6th. And on Tuesday, the main villains were played by Senators Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, and Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. David Weissman tweeted, "The fact that Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley are on the jury is exactly why I wanted witnesses in the impeachment hearing. Those two seditious traitors need to testify before Congress. Scott McFarlane tweets, today Senator Josh Hawley will question the former U.S. Capitol Police Chief and former sergeants at arms about failures to prevent the insurrection on January 6th. He's on the Senate Homeland Security Committee for today's hearing, and just pointing out that he was going to be doing that. Kurt Bardella tweeted, the picture is worth 1,000 words. Josh Hawley is a seditionist who supports white nationalism. And, of course, he shared that picture that has gone viral of Josh Hawley raising a fist to the protesters at the Capitol. The Center for American Progress, progressive think tank, tweets, Ted Cruz's partner in crime, Josh Hawley, incited an insurrection against our country. Then he fled to another country as Texans froze in the dark. Even their former law professor agrees. Cruz and Hawley abandoned their oaths of office. They must be expelled from the Senate. Just a few quick hot takes on Twitter about Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz. And here is Ted Cruz acting like, well, you can decide how you want to characterize this stupidity.
This hearing is nonetheless productive for analyzing the security decisions and law enforcement decisions that were made real time and for learning from them what can be done differently to ensure that an attack like that never again occurs.
Well, pick me up. I have an idea. I have a suggestion. Maybe you don't encourage it by denying the election outcome and lying about it all. That would be a great place to start, Ted Cruz, you epic, massive flaming asshole. And speaking of terrible people, Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri was asked by a reporter what he thought about accusations that he was one of the people who was responsible for the insurrection.
Senator, what do you say to your fellow senators and to Americans who believe that you are complicit in this attack?
That's outrageous. I would say it's absolutely outrageous and an utter lie, and no one, I think, who knows any of the facts alleges any such thing.
That's such a weird thing to say. Do you hear like Democrats and people on the left and liberals say that type of thing? Nobody who knows all the facts would say such a thing. That's a strange and stupid defensive thing to say, because the truth is the vast majority of people who know the facts do think that Josh Hawley was complicit. Here's Chris Hayes saying just that on his show last night on MSNBC, All In.
I mean, actually, I'm one of the people who knows the facts. Lots of people who know the facts do allege precisely that, Senator. In fact, the idea that either of those men, Cruz and Hawley, who not only pushed the big lie the election was illegitimate, but actively acted to overturn the election democratic process, who made January 6th the big showdown day where they could do it, where they could stop Joe Biden from becoming president. The fact they were allowed to participate in the hearing is what strikes many as truly outrageous.
Chris Hayes on MSNBC last night. And just to reframe it one more time, because it really is a crazy thing. Republican senators Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, James Lankford, and Ron Johnson, who either objected to the election results or questioned the election results, are now participating in a hearing about the Capitol attack that was encouraged in part by their rhetoric and actions. I think that's put well by Kyle Griffin on Twitter. And something definitely isn't right with Ron Johnson. There's not a conspiracy theory that he doesn't buy into if it coincides with whatever he wants to believe. And on Tuesday, he read an entry from a right-wing blog that was just hearsay. You've got to hear it to believe it. And it is really something. Here he is, reading a completely fact-free blog entry into the Senate Homeland Security hearing record.
A very few didn't share the jovial, friendly, earnest demeanor of the great majority. Some obviously didn't fit in, and he describes 4 different types of people: plainclothes militants, agents provocateurs, fake Trump protesters, and then disciplined, uniformed column of attackers. I think these are the people that probably planned this.
Well, yeah, what fake Trump protesters? Ron Johnson, what a piece of work this guy is. And the biggest newspaper in his state, I believe, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, has had enough of Ron Johnson. In an editorial, they write, Johnson must go. It's obvious now that he won't do the honorable thing and resign after violating his oath to support and defend the Constitution. By what he has shown of his character, there is no reason to believe he will keep his campaign promise to not run for a third term when this one expires. If he runs again, Johnson must be opposed in both the primary and general elections by people who care enough about democracy to support it and defend it. The other two members of Wisconsin's insurrection coalition must also be opposed in both primary and general elections by people who will support our democracy. Those other two members are written about in this piece at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. So, a little bit about what happened yesterday. I hope you saw the testimony. I don't think we learned too much. But in case you didn't get to hear much of it, and I didn't yesterday, here is a whole mashup from the New York Times of some of the highlights and some of the testimony. Starting with the chairwoman, the senator from Minnesota, former presidential nominee, and woman who looks like she talks about ice fishing a lot, but has never actually been ice fishing, Amy Klobuchar.
I think it's important to note that we planned this entire hearing on a bipartisan basis. That's because the stakes are so high, and we want this, and I say this to our witnesses as well, we want this to be as constructive as possible, because in order to figure out the solutions, so this doesn't happen again, we must have the facts. On January...
Here is Captain Carnisha Mendoza. She is U.S. Capitol Police.
January 6th, we anticipated an event similar to the Million MAGA March that took place on November 14th. Where we would likely face groups fighting among one another. I proceeded to the rotunda where I noticed a heavy smoke-like residue and smelled what I believed to be military-grade CS gas, a familiar smell. It was mixed with fire extinguisher spray deployed by rioters. The rioters continued to deploy CS into the rotunda. Officers received a lot of gas exposure, which is worse inside the building than outside because there's nowhere for it to go. I received chemical burns to my face that still have not healed to this day.
The events I witnessed.
Here is Stephen's son. He's the former police chief, Capitol Police Chief. He resigned.
On January 6th was the worst attack on law enforcement and our democracy that I've seen in my entire career. I witnessed insurgents beating police officers with fists, pipes, sticks, bats, metal barricades, and flagpoles. These criminals came prepared for war. They came with their own radio system to coordinate the attack. Based on the intelligence that we received, we planned for an increased level of violence at the Capitol and that some participants may be armed. But none of the intelligence we received predicted what actually occurred.
At 2:22.
And that's where Ted Cruz apparently during that was just texting. He's on his phone typing something. Here now is Chief of Washington's Metropolitan Police Department, Robert Conti.
2 p.m., a call was convened with, among others, myself, leadership of the U.S. Capitol Police, the National Guard, and the Department of the Army. I was surprised at the reluctance to immediately send the National Guard to the Capitol grounds. In the meantime, by 2:30 p.m., the district had requested additional officers from as far away as New Jersey and issued notice of an emergency citywide curfew beginning at 6 p.m.
Based on the intelligence,
Here is now, that's Paul Irving, the former House Sergeant at Arms.
We all believed that the plan met the threat and that we were prepared. We now know that we had the wrong plan. As one of the senior security leaders responsible for the event, I am accountable for that. I accept that responsibility, and as you know, I have resigned my position. Much has been said about whether optics affected my judgment in a January 4 telephone call with Chief Sund and Senate Sergeant at Arms Stenger about a National Guard offer to incorporate 125 unarmed National Guard troops into the security plan. Let me be clear. Optics, as portrayed in the media, played no role whatsoever in my decisions about security, and any suggestion to the contrary is false. Safety was always paramount when making security plans for January 6th.
Well, you should have looked on the QAnon blogs and websites and postings, because they were telling you exactly what they were going to do. And everybody who was, all the journalists who were covering that knew exactly what they were going to do, and they were not surprised. And I'm still shocked at this. and this is only the beginning of the investigation of what happened on that horrible dark day in early January. All right, so I also wanted to play a little bit of sound for you from Congresswoman Deb Holland's confirmation hearing for Interior Secretary. I think it's so awesome and important that Joe Biden has nominated a Native American woman who's a congresswoman to be in charge of what's left of America's land and natural resources. She was, of course, questioned hard by the senators from the fossil fuel states like Wyoming, where John Barrasso was giving her a hard time. But I just wanted to share about a minute and a half of this with you.
As I've learned in this role, there's no question that fossil energy does and will continue to play a major role in America for years to come. I know how important oil and gas revenues are to critical services, but we must also recognize that the energy industry is innovating, and our climate challenge must be addressed. Together, we can work to position our nation and all of its people for success.
Now, you had said you will work your heart out for everyone, including fossil fuel workers. My question is for you, why not just let these workers keep their jobs?
Senator, it's my understanding that President Biden has put just a pause on new leases. He didn't ban new leases. He didn't put a moratorium on new leases. It's a pause to review the fossil program at the federal fossil fuel program. And so I know that there are still thousands of leases and thousands of permits that are moving forward. And
so then, if confirmed, would you tell the president that it's unwise to continue the pause as a permanent ban?
I don't believe that it is a permanent ban, Senator. I am more than happy to work with you and to work with, of course, at the pleasure of the president and along with, if I'm confirmed, my colleagues to make sure that we're doing everything we can to create jobs for Americans.
There you go. That is Congresswoman Deb Holland. She is a representative for New Mexico's 1st congressional district since 2019, former chair of the Democratic Party of New Mexico. Her district includes most of Albuquerque, and she would be the first Native American pick to run the Interior Department. The Interior Department, that would be scary. And it's just so significant and such an important significant nomination, and I'm following that one closely. I'll be following the work closely. One of my best friends is Steve Chase, and he is the director of the National Conservation Training Center, and that is part of Fish and Wildlife, which is part of Interior. So I know a lot of folks over there, and just they're really positive and excited about Deb Holland. That's what I'm hearing. And so let me move on to another audio clip, and this comes to us from the Reagan Institute, who hosted a Zoom interview with Congresswoman Liz Cheney, and I actually think it's very interesting what she says here. It's super important that it's Liz Cheney saying it, because she is an extremely conservative, I would call her not living in reality when it comes to so much economic data and racial data and foreign policy decision disasters and forever wars and, of course, scientific data. I think she's been really, really terrible in Congress, as a matter of fact. But she's being held up now as heroic for voting to impeach President Trump. And here is Liz Cheney sounding reasonable until the very end, when she starts bashing Democrats and their desires to expand socialist. But listen to what she's saying. I think it's important. Liz Cheney, Reagan Institute.
I think there are many things. I think, first of all, certainly the potential of a 9/11 style commission. I think that's very important. I think there are many aspects to what happened on the 6th and in the days, weeks, and months leading up to it that have to be investigated. And I think having a commission with the formality that we saw in the 9/11 commission, with the bipartisan participation that we saw in the 9/11 commission, that's very important. A commission with subpoena power, a commission that really is able, and I think it should have retired officials on it. I don't think you should have current officials on the commission. I really think the model that was used in the aftermath of 9/11 is a good one. So I think that's important. I think there will be criminal investigations that are going on and that will be ongoing. But I think while those things are happening, it's very important for us to ignore the temptation to look away. And it's very important, especially for us as Republicans, to make clear that we aren't the party of white supremacy. You certainly saw.
I mean, did you hear that? That's Liz Cheney saying we have to make sure that the Republican Party is not the party of white supremacy. I mean, that is such a significant admission that that's an issue and a challenge for her party. And she goes on to talk about more. Listen.
Anti-Semitism. You saw the symbols of Holocaust denial, for example, at the Capitol that day. You saw a Confederate flag being carried through the rotunda. And I think we as Republicans in particular have a duty and an obligation to stand against that, to stand against insurrection, and to be clear that for us to fight, what Margaret Thatcher called very aptly the quicksand of socialism, which we are facing from the left, for us to fight that effectively, the Constitution has got to be our shield. And we have to defend the Constitution because we know that, frankly, there are too many on the other side who won't. And because that's our best and most effective tool to stand against the infringements on First Amendment rights and Second Amendment rights and the massive expansion of the role of the federal government.
All right. Okay. Thank you. I've heard enough, Liz Cheney, but I still thought what she said there was really significant. And so I wanted to share it with you. But I think that's all I got time for the last 24. Now it's time to move on to the news dump. And I got to say, I love these jingles. Dan McDonald has been recording the jingles, and now other listeners have submitted scripts for them. Joe Liotta did, and now apparently Dr. Barry Hummel sent this one to Dan McDonald, and I don't know why, but they keep making me laugh really hard. I hope you're laughing along with me.
As we start another Wednesday, it's a really big hump, but we can make it better with a giant news dump.
All right, Danny Mac. Pete Coe just sent me another one. It's becoming the whole Howard Stern thing here. People writing and submitting bits and jingles. I absolutely love it. It makes the show so much more fun to do and to produce. And I love hearing from you in any possible way that you want to contribute to this podcast that has thousands and thousands of people listening every day. Please do. All right. News dump time. It's not COVID. It's not politics. It's not Tiger Woods, but it is undercover. Let's do it. We start with this story, which I think is a great story, and it's from the Associated Press. The headline is at least 160 Confederate symbols have been taken down in 2020. And the reporting on this comes from the Southern Poverty Law Center, which shared it with the Associated Press ahead of releasing it. And it's a great story to mention because my second guest on today's show, Sean Perryman, who's running for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, did a lot of work as the chairman of the NAACP in Virginia, and he in a Virginia chapter, and he helped rename a school from Robert E. Lee to John Lewis, and he talks about that in our conversation. So that's a really great story, and statistics coming from the Southern Poverty Law Center. 160 Confederate symbols have been taken down, or as some people would have you say, believe, they've been canceled. No, they're bad statues. Okay, moving on. French actor, very famous French actor, Gerard Depardieu, has been charged with rape. Apparently, the 72-year-old actor was reportedly indicted in December for rape and sexual assault, which he allegedly committed in the summer of 2018. And let me stay in France for this story, where a mayor of one of France's most famously gastronomic cities, says ABC News, has kicked up a storm of protest and debate by taking meat off the menu at schools. Food fight, reads the headline. Meat-free school meals spark furor in France. So there's two French stories. I thought that was actually a really interesting story because apparently the farmers were pissed And the mayor's like an ecologist and an environmentalist, and the farmers were really mad in France, and they drove their farm vehicles and they brought their cows and their goats to the protest. And apparently they got a lot of meaty items on the menu. So, all right, let's move on back to America, where I'm reading about a virus, malware that has infected nearly 40,000 Apple Mac computers, which is what I use, and I'm sure many of you use, and don't usually get infected with these types of malwares, I think. But it's called Silver Sparrow. Apparently, it's not yet engaged in malicious activity, but maybe it's in our computers. What are we supposed to do with this? The malware, dubbed by cybersecurity firm Red Canary, is baffling because of its elusive motives. All right, I'll read more about that. But this is the news dump. It's rapid fire. It gives you the ideas to maybe look deeper into stories that you're more interested in and affect you somehow. You want to maybe do something about it, be aware of at the least. Moving on, charges will not be filed in the death of a New York man named Daniel Prude, who was seen on police body camera footage being pinned to the ground with a spit bag over his head. The New York Attorney General announced Tuesday that a grand jury voted not to indict any of the Rochester police officers involved in the incident. Also, the 75-year-old guy, also this is in Western New York, that was a Rochester Police Department. Now, this is the Buffalo Police. 75-year-old man who was shoved to the ground. Remember that video at the Buffalo protest? He's filed a lawsuit against the city. His name is Martin Gugino. He suffered a fractured skull after his head struck the pavement, and according to the lawsuit, he was seriously injured on June 4th. Felony assault charges against two police officers were dismissed by a grand jury earlier this month, so I guess this is a civil suit. See what happens with that. That was a horrific video and action. Also yesterday, NASA released some new images from the new Mars Rover they're calling Percy, that's arrived on the red planet last Thursday. And they teased the image on the Twitter handle shortly after landing, but yesterday released the high-resolution version on its website. And I'm now loving this and following it, and it's really very cool. So check that out. The photo details the surface of Mars like never before, showing the extraterrestrial rocks and debris on the planet's Jezero crater. First mission where NASA is collecting and storing Martian rock and dust. Very, very cool. And a big tech sell-off on Wall Street on Tuesday. Tech-heavy NASDAQ market lost about a half a percentage point, clawing back most of an early drop as much as 3.9%. But Facebook, Disney, Netflix, and other stocks helped drive the comeback. Early drops in big tech companies like Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft moderated as the day went on. Is there a stock or a company that you're happy with, that you've invested in, that you feel good about? If so, let me know, and I'll mention it on tomorrow's News Dump. All right, that is it for today's, though, and now I would like to get to my first guest, who I am so excited about. This week has been a great week of guests who are authors of books. I had Michael Mann, I had Heather McGee, and now I have Jonathan Cohn. Jonathan Cohn's new book is called The 10-Year War, Obamacare and the Unfinished Crusade for Universal Coverage. And I've talked to Jonathan several times over the years. This is his first time on the podcast, but he's one of the best journalists covering healthcare and health policy. He's a senior national correspondent at Huffington Post, but he's widely respected across the entire news media journalism spectrum when it comes to issues of politics and policy, specifically at healthcare, of course. He's a former senior editor at The New Republic. He's written for The New York Times, The Atlantic, and so many other outlets. He's won a whole bunch of awards. One of the nation's leading experts on health policy, according to The Washington Post. His new book is... I can't put it down. It's so good. I'm learning so much from it. I highly recommend it. And he's a great follow on Twitter, by the way, at Citizen Cohn, at Citizen Cohn, C-O-H-N. And now here is my almost hour-long conversation, and I think it's real good, with Jonathan Cohn, author of The 10-Year War. There he is, Jonathan Cohn. Thank you so much for joining me, and congratulations on I think, a career effort here on this book. I mean, you have been covering these issues most of your career, healthcare. And as a result, you've established relationships with policy experts, politicians, other journalists and academics, and you put it all into this book. It must have been really difficult. So I just got to say big congratulations on it. And thank you for joining me.
Thank you. It was really difficult. I mean, I'm a neurotic writer by nature, so I mean, I struggle over tweets. And for something like this, it was actually I was telling one of my sources recently that this was so hard, both to pull together the different threads of the story, but also I was really trying to pull in different perspectives, and it was incredibly complicated. So thank you. I appreciate that. It was hard.
Before I get into the guts of the book, I just want to talk about some of the principles of talking about healthcare to help people understand how we think about this. And you go through a great history of America's healthcare system and how it has been established and negotiated. But I think it's important to talk about how people feel in America morally, specifically in America, morally about healthcare. And so the way I want to ask you this question is, in America, we struggle with this question about, is healthcare a right? And I think we should probably always narrow that down to, is health insurance? And we can talk about that. But my question to you is, how does the rest of the world, generally speaking, see America's relationship with our healthcare system? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, I can, in part because I've spent some time overseas looking at their healthcare systems over the years, talking to people. I mean, it's always amazing to me if you talk to someone who lives in almost any country that has universal healthcare, which is every country in the developed world. I mean, I've had these conversations and they'll ask you, so what's healthcare like in the United States? And you'll start to explain, well, it really depends on who's your insurer. And then you might lose your insurance. Even if you don't lose your insurance, you're going to have to pay this out of pocket and you're going to have to go through networks and pre-approvals and just this look of astonishment. They just can't understand how it's such a different world. Healthcare is assumed to be a right overseas. It's something that is assumed to be guaranteed. They have debates about it all the time because they have the same, they have debates. How much should it's the government is spending on? How much is the government spending? What should the benefit package look like? And every country's system is a little different. I mean, there's this, people should know universal healthcare comes in many varieties, and depending on whether you're in Germany or the Netherlands or the United Kingdom or Sweden, it's going to look and feel different. But together, they all have a lot in common, and it's just a very different world from the United States. It's expected that it's a right. Everybody will be able to get health care, and it's society's obligation to make that possible through some kind of national health insurance system.
I think the difference really, though, that you're missing is in Europe, especially in Asia, to some extent, they believe that people die. Like there's a certain understanding that you can't pay for everything and that there are limits. And they seem to understand this phrase trade-offs in a way that America has no idea about. And we can talk about why. But specifically, they're negotiating about, as you said, how much to spend. But there are other real distinct differences. For example, it's my understanding that most other countries don't advertise drugs the way we are just pounded by drug advertisements from TV to radio to print ads even. What are just a couple of other distinctions with how the rest of the world, from Canada to Israel to Japan to Switzerland, looks at America and says, you do what?
Yeah, well, actually, the drugs are, I think, emblematic of that in the sense that healthcare in this country is still a commodity, right? I mean, it's treated as something that's bought and sold. And that's just not the way it's approached in other countries. They may have some elements that have some commercial element to it. And again, depending on which country you're in, you may actually get your insurance from a private insurer. But those private insurers don't look like private insurers in this country. I mean, they're regulated in the way we regulate the power companies, as public utilities. And it's just a dramatic difference. It's a different relationship. The financial part of it, so much of it is actually hidden from the consumer's point of view, right? I mean, it's just, it's just you, the individual patient, are not responsible for shopping around for the best deal. And you don't have to sit and calculate your out-of-pocket expenses higher here or lower there. That just doesn't happen in those countries. And again, and the drug industry, the drug advertising is a fascinating example. There are only 2 countries that allow that kind of advertising. The only other one is New Zealand. Yes. I have never, I did a whole feature article on this years ago, just on television advertising for drugs. And that's a whole other story. We can go into some, and we could spend an hour on that. But I've never figured out why New Zealand is the other country. It's a very random thing. I don't know why. And maybe one of your listeners will tweet at me or email me with the answer, because I'd love to know.
So when we talk, though, about healthcare, health insurance, we're generally talking about the kind of 3-legged stool, right? It's cost or affordability. How much does it cost? Then it's access or coverage. Am I going to be able to get healthcare coverage? Am I going to be able to see a doctor? And then thirdly, it's the quality. So if you can afford it and you can see a doctor, is the doctor any good? Are the prescriptions any good? Is the advice, the treatment any good? And most, again, of the rest of the world, those are trade-offs. It's not completely perfect. But in America, it seems like the only way that you're going to get the best of that and have it be affordable is to have a job at a company that's a pretty big company. So employer-based insurance. How far back do we need to go to figure out how we came up with that stupid idea? And how does the rest of the world see that?
So employer insurance has its origins in this country in the Great Depression. You need if you take a very quick math lesson here, because you have to, insurance is all about the math, right? I mean, any kind of health insurance arrangement, a government insurance arrangement, a private insurance arrangement, you get any random group of people, there's going to be a small minority at one time who are responsible for the lion's share of the medical bills, right? It's the people with chronic illness, people who just had terrible accidents, injuries, what have you. And at any one moment, that's a very small percentage of any group of people. So the trick is to figure out how to pay for those people, because their bills are very expensive. And the obvious way to do it is to say, well, in this large group of people, most people, if everyone just pays a certain amount of money into the system, there will be enough to cover everybody's bills. Over the course of your lifetime, that probably works out to a pretty good deal, because we all have a pretty good chance of getting sick or injured. I mean, you don't know if you're going to develop some form of cancer later on, or you'll have a child with some condition, or you'll get hit by a car. I mean, not to wish this on anybody, but that's the way it works. So every other country in the world, this all becomes sort of apparent as a problem in the early 20th century, because that's when medicine becomes advanced enough that it starts to become expensive, right? Now, we have doctors who need training, and we have equipment, and we have hospitals.
Yeah, and thanks to you on Twitter, I also bought Paul Starr's book, The Social Transformation of American Medicine, which explains, I think, much of what you're starting to talk about here. And I got that tip from you. It's very helpful. Not as good, in my opinion, as your book, The 10-Year War.
Well, I mean, Paul's book is the sort of the Bible.
Sorry,
we all read.
Insulted your God, but
no, it's fine. He was actually my first editor. Actually, and I always sort of say he was partly responsible. So, and you'll read about Paul. He's actually a character in my book later on.
Yeah.
We're going to get to that. So every other country in the world says, all right, well, let's just put everyone in one big pool, and then we'll have a national health insurance system. We in the United States don't do that. It's politically complicated. Franklin Roosevelt thinks about it, but he doesn't want to, he was going to include it as part of the Social Security Act back in the 30s. And they thought that would be too politically risky. They were worried about already the medical profession in particular at that time was the big opponent of national health insurance. They thought it would mean they would regulate their incomes. They would have autonomy. That's actually Paul's book is a lot about that. So we don't do that. But we have lots of people who need medical care. They can't pay their bills. Eventually the hospitals are in trouble because, they're filling up with patients who are, can't give them the money they need for their care. So eventually, the idea of, well, where can we kind of make this system work on our own in the private sector? And employers start to become an attractive source, for where to base insurance. Because if you have a large employer, think about it, any large company, you're going to get that kind of random population with a sort of most people are healthy, a small handful need medical care. They all pool their resources. You can build an insurance system around that. And that's how the employer system gets started. And eventually a series of policy decisions kind of reinforce it. The two big ones that we always talk about are during World War II, there were wage and price controls, because there were labor shortages. And so if you were a company, you couldn't just offer more higher salary to lure workers away from the factory.
Imagine that. Wage and price controls. Imagine anyone introducing that to the conversation about any policy as a way to, the great example would be as a way to fight the pandemic. We are going to control wages or prices. That we can't even get people to wear masks. The idea of wage or price control, we are so far from where we were then. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think perspective is important there. So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, and it's maybe we'll get to this later, but the shift away from that even being that kind of government control of the economy, which at one point was something completely normal and discussed in American politics, that we don't anymore. Right. It's a big part of the reason how we end up with the healthcare plan we did, but that's another story. So there were wage and price controls, but they said health insurance is exempt. So employers start using health insurance as a way to lure workers. And then at a series of decisions, the government decides that if you have a group health insurance program, so you have an insurance policy from your employer, it won't count, the money that goes in the insurance won't count as part of your taxable income. So in effect, $1 of insurance becomes worth more than $1 in wages. And these push along, and eventually unions get the right to negotiate for company benefits, and that gives them an institutional stake in it. And basically, this system evolves, and that becomes the center of our healthcare system. Now, other countries did, and it was not a completely illogical idea. Other countries also initially built their systems around employers. Some did, but the difference was they immediately recognized that wasn't going to be enough and turned it into a true national health insurance system. We never did. Instead, we've spent the almost now coming up on 100 years since then, patching around that system to get everybody covered.
Part one of your book covers 1991 to 2008. So basically the healthcare fight with Bill Clinton and the Clinton administration up until and through the George Bush administration, up until Obama, obviously. But I just realized there's one more important question I forget to ask. The distinction about America, and you write about this obviously in the book, and you've been writing about it forever, is America is like the only place that you can go bankrupt because of medical bills. And I think that's such a big, giant issue because of the choices that we then make and all these surveys about Europeans being happier and so on. I mean, when I lost my corporate job, the only thing I cared about was insurance. I knew I would find a way to make money. I just didn't know how I would find a way to afford insurance on the open market, on the individual market. And that caused me so much stress and concern about bills. And what if we had something? And of course, we did have something. My daughter gets diagnosed with scoliosis and needs to be put in a $3,000 back brace. And now we're spending all of this money because I lost my corporate job after 14 years. That's not a concern that most of the rest of the world, developed world, has to worry about. Medical bill caused bankruptcy caused by your medical bills. Also fair to say?
Very fair to say, and it's amazing how many times I've had conversations with people just like that. So many people, their decisions about everyday life, what job to take, are driven by healthcare decisions. There's a couple in my book who that's in this new book for whom that's the case because they have a son with a very rare condition and they have to sort of. Before the Affordable Care Act, they're very conscious of what job they take will cover his medications. And that's so common to hear that. And yet, and so common to hear people who are not able to figure it out because they can't get good insurance and they get stuck with a bill and then they end up in financial ruin. And it's not, there are people in other countries who struggle with medical bills, just to be clear. It's not unheard of, but it's more the exception. And it's seen as a dramatic, I think appropriately, as a dramatic failure of society. Like, that should not happen. And to anyone who's ever had to deal, I always say, look, who's ever had to deal with a real medical crisis, that's hard enough, right? If it's you, if it's your loved one, if it's your child, if it's your parent, whatever, that is such a difficult thing to go through. You shouldn't also have to worry where you're going to have to pay the bills. And again, I think, this is something I say in the book, I don't think it's a coincidence that so many of the people involved with trying to promote healthcare reform in its various forms are people who, if you go back into their backstories, you'll discover they had an experience like that, a loved one or themselves who was struggling to deal with that.
Yeah, you mentioned Congresswoman, the story about Congresswoman Slotkin, who has a great story like that, or a tragic story like that. And Barack Obama ran on that story of his mother. And there are so many other people who can relate to that. It has nothing to do with liberal or conservative. And by the way, the idea that, conservatives support this employer base, like there's nothing conservative about staying at a job and not taking a risk and starting your own business because you don't want to leave your health care. Also, people stay in the states that they're living in. Like my wife and I are thinking, could we ever move outside of New York State and be self-employed and get affordable care? Well, not in Florida. So, I mean, even within the states, there's problems based on, the Medicaid expansion and so on. Let's go back to the book. Sorry, The 10-Year War. The great Jonathan Cohn is here. The book is so good. I'm loving it. I'm learning so much I never knew, and so many details, even though I covered it for 10 years, that I never knew. But let's go back to the Clinton administration. Where was America's healthcare system when Bill Clinton was elected, and what were their proposals to try to fix it?
Yeah, so Bill Clinton gets elected, and, by this point, by the 1970s, we'd kind of gotten to a sort of, the employer system had grown and covered most of the working population, but not all of it. We had Medicare and Medicaid, which had been created during the 1960s under Lyndon Johnson. And Medicare basically took the elderly off the table, right? It basically gave universal coverage to the elderly. So for people over, hitting retirement age, over 65, they get to the promised land of national health insurance. There's prescription drugs and there's out-of-pocket costs, so it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but at least that basic layer is there. But then you had people who were low-income people and didn't qualify for Medicaid, because to be on Medicaid, depending on what state you lived in, you had to be in these very strict, narrow categories. Pregnant women, for example, were eligible for Medicaid, but a single mom might not be, depending on what state you were in. And then in addition, there were all the people like you who are sort of in business for themselves, or didn't have, or were working in a low-wage job where the employer didn't offer coverage, and they didn't have insurance. And this had been true for a while now, ever since the 60s, and had come up in the 70s and the 80s. But there really wasn't a lot of political enthusiasm for doing anything about it. This is the Reagan era, and politics in this country are really swinging in a conservative direction. Any government program to expand health insurance, that's just going to run into, we don't want big government. We don't want a lot of spending. We don't want a lot of regulation. What happens and what starts to happen, and then the recession of the late 80s, early 90s really kicks us into overdrive, is that for the first time, you have middle-class people who have jobs losing jobs and worried about their insurance. And also, or if they hold on to their insurance, the out-of-pocket costs are going up, the premiums are going up. And healthcare access and coverage is more and more becoming a middle-class issue. And that gives it a lot of new political resonance. And there was in 1991, there's a special election in Pennsylvania, which was really important in the story of healthcare reform in this country, where there was a tragedy and a Republican senator died in a plane crash. And a Democrat named Harris Wofford, who was a big figure in the civil rights movement, was in the Kennedy administration, ends up being the Democrat running. He's a long shot underdog. He's like 30 points behind in the polls. And he ends up, he ends up campaigning on healthcare reform. And he has this great line, which he got from a doctor he knew, which is, everyone has a right to a lawyer if they're arrested. Well, why don't you have a right to a doctor if you get sick? And it really catches on, and he wins. And everyone's kind of shocked by this. And it kind of is one of those elections that really reverberates through the whole country. And Bill Clinton is running for president now. It's the 1992 presidential campaign. The Democrats are running, and the Democrats notice this, and they, for the first time, really get enthusiastic it's been a while. They're really enthusiastic about universal coverage. And Bill Clinton, he campaigns on a promise to do that. And he gets elected, and he decides that universal health care is going to be his big domestic push for the first 2 years. And, it's easy to forget now, but there was a while where it looked like he was going to succeed. He gave this speech to Congress, which was, was a Bill Clinton speech. It was one of his great speeches. And, people loved it. And then Hillary Clinton, and again, if you only know Hillary from the last few years, this might surprise you or it might not. But, she was put in charge of the task force to write the bill. She goes up to Congress to testify. And of course, she kills it because she's Hillary Clinton. She knows every detail. Here she got a standing ovation I don't know if it was stand, but she got applause from the Ways and Means Committee after she testified, which you just never see that in Congress. She really wowed people. And I think a lot of people thought they were going to succeed.
What happened? Why didn't they? What was the argument? Because you write so much about the politics, the media. I mean, you cover it all in this book. I can't believe, by the way, that I'm reading this book like a great novel. I wonder if people that aren't as interested in healthcare or politics will be as fascinated by your book. I hope they will be. And it's not just because I think so much about it, because you put it into plain terms. It's part history, part analysis. And lots of really great anecdotes. But you talk about the kinds of arguments, phrases, campaigns that destroy a policy idea very quickly. What was the argument? What did they use to sink Hillary Care, as I think it might have been called?
Yeah. Hillary Care, Clinton Care. It was a couple of things. They ran into a bunch of problems. Some of them were just the way they approached it. It was the mechanics of proposing. They spent several months, coming up with this plan, and they delivered it to Congress's doorstep, and Congress was like, hey, no, we write the bills here. There's a scene, John Dingell, who of course has passed away since, but a longtime champion of universal health care, basically looks at the couple of Clinton advisors in his office and says, or actually it was his chief of staff, says, okay, this is nice. This isn't going anywhere. Now let's talk about what we're really going to do. So the congressional relations were terrible, but they also like this idea that the White House shouldn't sit and write a plan and then deliver it to Congress. Let Congress do its thing so Congress can kind of get, invested in it. Number two, they really took on a lot of the healthcare industry. Now they were trying to, the interest groups, this has always been the story with healthcare. You're fighting the American Medical Association, you're fighting the hospitals, you're fighting the drug industry. The Clinton folks tried the Clinton folks did their best to win over some of the groups. And they did, the AMA actually gave a kind of lukewarm quasi endorsement, which was quite an achievement. But the drug makers were not happy. The insurance companies were not happy, and they really couldn't beat them. Pharma in particular is it's one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful lobbies in Washington, D.C. If you go up against a fight against the pharmaceutical industry, chances are you're going to lose. So that was a problem. And then they took some lessons about the content, the actual substance. And what they discovered was that people who have employer insurance, they may not be happy with it. They may be scared it's getting too expensive. It's not reliable, but they know it. They're comfortable with it. And if you come at them with something else, it's very easy to scare those people and tell them that, what you're going to get instead is not going to be better.
Yes.
And that was a huge problem. And I talk about all of that. I mean, these were all, after the plan fails, it falls apart. And it also falls apart, frankly, because the Republican Party is changing. At the beginning, there's this sort of group of moderate Republicans who are very eager to work with the Clintons. And the Republican Party didn't look like it did today. You had a number of moderates who had histories of bipartisan work with Democrats on health care. By the time that it is all done, the Republican Party is pretty much, most of them have really turned against it. And it's, you talk about it being a novel. I don't know how much, there are all these little bits and pieces I discovered in my research, but there's this great story of how Republicans are really learning the art of obstruction at this point. And Newt Gingrich is coming on the scene and he's developing it. And there's this great quote from a senator who kind of quips, that Newt Gingrich, he gives obstruction a good name. Well, who was the senator? Mitch McConnell. It was like a foreshadowing moment. I was wow. Yeah. And that's just, you can sort of see the sort of beginnings of that strategy back then.
Does anything significant happen during the 8 years of Bill Clinton with healthcare at all?
It does. And, after the death of the Clinton plan, no one wanted to talk about big healthcare plans anymore. Right. They did make some progress. A very important program, the Children's Health Insurance Program, which that was bipartisan, and that was Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch, who's a Republican, working with the White House, and Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton. And that couple million children got, insurance through that. And important for a lot of reasons, obviously for those kids and their, and eventually it's expanded to include some of their families. Again, it's a state program. So there's depends on what state you live in. But also I think gave hope to some Democrats and some reform advocates that there was a way to win over Republicans on this if you did it right. And the reason I do spend a lot of time in the book talking about the Clinton healthcare plan. And I did that for a reason, which is that I don't think it's possible to estimate, to exaggerate how much the specter of that failure hung over Democrats in 2009.
Yeah.
It was such a powerful motivator. It affected their substantive decisions about what kind of policy to advance, their strategic sense of what choices to make, and their psychology at the end. And I think that's really important to recognize that when we get to 2009, you have a bunch of Democrats who really want to do healthcare. They've been working on universal healthcare their entire careers. You have people like Henry Waxman, John Dingell, who has since passed away, Ted Kennedy, who was towards the end diagnosed with brain cancer and knew this was his last shot. This is his lifetime cause. And that fear of failure and that sense that this is our last chance, it was constantly in their minds and motivated them, I think, to especially the more liberal ones, I think, to make a lot of compromises, for better or worse, depending on your perspective. But they had tasted failure. They'd lived through failure. They did not want to fail again. And they were so determined to get across the finish line. And their guide for that was the Clinton healthcare plan. And it was always, don't make those mistakes again. Don't.
Yeah, that's the kind of point that's so great that you put all of that in the book and talk about it now, because it's the kind of point that the public will never understand. The kind of legacy of the last fight on this issue, whether it be healthcare or guns, and how that might stay with policy experts or those who are still serving in government and Congress. So it's important to remind people that your experiences, your decisions are colored by the past in this case when it comes to healthcare. But before we get to 2008, 2009, we got to talk about just briefly what happened with healthcare in the Bush administration, because it's super relevant and super important. You talk about Paul Ryan and other Republicans' vote on a new benefit in Medicare. And when it comes to, big government and government-run programs and cost, Republicans completely threw out all principle to pass what was generally seen as a welcome added benefit in Medicare. Democrats and Republicans generally, I mean, you can talk about the fight, but I think it's really important just to mention that achievement during the Bush administration and how it illustrates the hypocrisy of Republicans on fiscal policy in general, and more specifically on health policy. And of course, when it comes to old people, I guess they're a strong constituency. But what happened with the Bush administration?
Well, you just hit on it. Politics was a big part of it. Medicare was designed originally without a prescription drug benefit because prescription drugs were not as big a part of healthcare in the 1960s when they designed the benefit package. Obviously, over the years, there was a recognition that, okay, we need to do something to fix this because senior citizens in particular, they get a lot of prescriptions. Now, some seniors were able to afford them. They, if you were lucky, you had, you retired and your old employer gave you a retiree health plan that wrapped around Medicare and covered your prescriptions. Or maybe you had a lot of money and you could buy one that was being made available on the private market. If you were very poor, you qualified for Medicaid, which covered prescriptions. But as always, this is the way our healthcare system worked. The poorest of the poor tended to get healthcare, but you really had to be in really dire straits. There's a whole middle ground of people who were not so low income that they qualified for Medicaid, but were really struggling with their prescription costs. And we are getting to a time when, as a constituency, they're up for grabs. Historically, prior to this, seniors tend to be more Democratic because it was the New Deal generation that remembered Roosevelt. But we're already seeing a shift by the early 2000s. This is now more of a constituency that's in play. And Democrats were really agitating for this. And Republicans, I think, as is often the pattern, felt they needed to come up with something on prescription drugs to match the Democratic offer. And that's a pattern we see recurring. Democrats talk about healthcare. Republicans are like, okay, we need to respond with an idea of our own. Now, it started as something that was very much, I think, the conservative impulse was, all right, let's use this as a chance. They never really loved Medicare, right? I mean, Republicans, conservatives, it's a big government program. They're always looking for ways to sort of turn
Reagan made records demonizing. Yeah. You wrote about that in the book. He's scared. He was a real fearmonger on Medicare, saying it was going to turn us into socialists. And I mean, it's always been demagogued as a socialist system. Although it is funny, my friend, who of course Dr. Aaron Carroll, always says Medicare is American as apple pie for 65 and older, but for anybody under, it's socialism.
Right. right? So, originally the idea to structure this was, let's use this as a kind of way to privatize the program. We'll say, okay, we'll come up with a prescription, some kind of benefit that's only available through private insurance, and you have to get out of the traditional Medicare program to get it. And Democrats are like, no, we're not going to do that. After Bush is elected and he's finishing his first term and he needs a win, they look at this again. And interestingly, there's a Republican in the Senate, Charles Grassley from Iowa, who's still in the Senate. He's on the Finance Committee. He's very close to
102 years old. He's older than Pat Leahy. I made all of that up. Go ahead.
Grassley has a very good relationship with a guy named Max Baucus, who's the ranking Democrat. They're both from rural states, predominantly rural states. They are both, relative to their parties, closer to the center. They have a kind of good working relationship, and there's a lot of collaboration going on, Democrats and Republicans, to try to do this. And they end up coming up with a program, among other things. Grassley isn't 100% wild about getting everyone out of Medicare because in general, private plans don't always work so well in rural areas. That's because of the math and the demographics. So he's a little reluctant to go where some of the more conservative Republicans want to go. They come up with a package and it goes to the House, it goes to the Senate, it changes. By the time they're done, a lot of the Democrats who had once supported it have turned against it. Ted Kennedy had really worked to craft the original proposal with Republicans. And by the time it's done, he's railing against it. He's furious. But Baucus votes for it. Grassley votes for it. Baucus, who's a Democrat, who's never that popular with other Democrats because he's always making deals with Republicans, says, look, this is sustainable and we can do this. And it gets people assistance, even if it's not perfect. And he turned out to be right. I mean, it's very popular now and sort of grew in popularity. Now, what you were talking about earlier is also true, which is that, Republicans, they had, you have this brand new program. It's going to be very expensive. So how are you going to pay for it? And Republicans decided, we're going to pay for it by not paying for it. We're just going to add it to the deficit. We're not going to worry about offsetting it with, taxes or cuts to other programs. And somehow, that was okay for them. They were willing to go along with that. They didn't fuss. Now, to be fair, there were conservative Republicans who did fuss at the time, but they were outvoted. And the party signs it. Bush gets his prescription drug benefit, runs on it, saying, hey, I delivered. He wins re-election. Program is real rocky at the beginning, but they work out the kinks. It becomes very popular. Although it's got problems. It's not generous enough. So you leave that as yet another piece of unfinished business.
And so then when we get to the Obama administration and he runs on healthcare, and we could talk about that if you want a little bit in terms of real issue. The issue changed so much to the point where Obama could speak to it in a way that, because circumstances had changed, public opinion had changed, there were so many nightmares that everybody could relate to. And now even people who didn't have health issues or didn't have to access their health insurance knew there were problems or didn't like their premiums to begin with. There were issues that Obama could capitalize on, that Democrats could capitalize on, and trying to go at it one more time. And he ran on comprehensive health care reform. The problem for this issue now is that, what is it going to be? What is the plan going to be? A more progressive plan, a more moderate and more conservative plan? And to fast forward a lot through the book and the issue, and you can pick up wherever you want, they settle on kind of a market-driven plan that was created by conservatives at a conservative think tank that was implemented by Republican Governor Mitt Romney in Massachusetts, that was used against him by his primary opponent, as you write this about. I didn't know this. I ever learned about it in your new book, The 10-Year War. But it was Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum. Forgive me. I sometimes block his name out. Who ran against Mitt Romney for the Republican nomination, saying, look at Romneycare. The point is, Obamacare ends up being the kind of conservative solution so that when they want to repeal and replace, they don't have anything because Obama already used it. That's what just keeps coming up in my brain as I'm reading your book and reading about repeal and replace. We knew there wasn't a replacement because the only solution that they had already been used. There wasn't anything that was going to replace it and do the things that they promised. So I'm not sure where to pick up with the Obama administration, but I felt like getting all that context out for you to respond to any of it. Where do they start?
Yeah. Well, maybe we start in Massachusetts, not to wind too far back, but we talked about where they were mindset after the Clinton plan. And, they've kind of come up with sort of rules for what this has to look like. You can't disrupt employer insurance. You don't want to change too much. It can't look like big government. And lo and behold, as this is all happening, the state of Massachusetts ends up passing a law like that. And the governor who's behind it is Mitt Romney, who's a conservative. And he kind of sells it as a conservative. He's not like a crusading for universal coverage, but, it's a good way to sort of manage Massachusetts finances. It looks more logical to him. He's like, why are we paying for people to go to the emergency room? It's charity care. Let's give them insurance. It's more efficient. And, and he likes the idea of this individual mandate, right? Which is very important. To him, that's a conservative idea because he says, look, there are people who could pay for their health insurance. They don't. And then they get sick. And then it's on us. We're making them take responsibility. That's a very conservative argument. He likes that. He becomes very passionate about that. He makes that case. That passes, and it really was like a eureka moment that just ripples throughout the sort of greater Democratic Party universe. And I interviewed Obama about this, and he was very explicit about this. He said, look, he's like, he's always described himself as a single payer guy if I could. He's got a history on healthcare going back to his time in the state legislature. He said, but, I don't think it's possible to get there right now. I see now. And he said, look, and he said what he said was what every other Democrat at the time said, which is, we look at Massachusetts, we see this thing passes, we see it's got a Republican governor behind it. It's got the Heritage Foundation saying nice things about it. I don't think any of them ever thought they were going to get like 50 Republicans to vote for it. But, they thought, could they peel off a handful? Yeah, they did. And they thought also, remember, the Democratic Party is pretty diverse. You got conservative Democrats in the party who are going to really exert a lot of pull over this. And they don't want to look too liberal because a lot of these, especially back then, you got a lot of senators were from Arkansas. You saw Democratic senators from Arkansas and Louisiana and North Carolina and North Dakota, places where Democrats don't do too well. So they don't want to look like they're endorsing. If they can say they're endorsing a Republican plan, that helps them. So, it was a political calculation in the sense that they were trying to figure out what can we get done? This looks like it works. And that's how they ended up at that model, which relied heavily on private insurance and has an individual mandate. In the end, they were not able to get any Republicans to vote for it. The GOP basically turned completely against it because of how the Republican Party was changing. And it was all they could do was just to keep conservative Democrats on board to get it through the House and get it through the Senate. And, they had to make all kinds of compromises. They started with a compromise and then they compromised on the compromise. And they got rid of, there was supposed to be a public option that was, like a little mini version of Medicare for all, just as kind of a starter kit almost. Well, that got jettisoned. They had to they had to keep expenditures under $1 trillion over 10 years because that number took on this mythical importance. And the thing was, if you weren't spending more than $1 trillion in the first 10 years, it really limited how much help you could give people to get insurance. And they made all kinds of they left a lot of power to the states. And so they ended up with a sort of compromised version of the plan that they thought they had developed only because they thought it would get Republicans. And that's how you end up with what they got in the Affordable Care Act. And then beyond that, they had hoped, the assumption was this will be like other things. Yeah, we'll fight about it and, we'll have this giant debate, but eventually it'll become law. Then it'll pass. And then we can quietly go to work on tinkering and fixing what doesn't work, building it up. The phrase they all used, Obama used it, it was supposed to be a starter home, right? A starter home. Then in a couple of years, you add a new wing. You put in air conditioning, you improve the insulation, you build it up. That was the hope.
So I think that the other really important point you talked about getting, the political pragmatists, the political possibilities to get the conservative Democrats, much less any Republicans, moderate Democrats. I mean, we could talk about Joe Lieberman forever. He'll always be a villain in my mind because I feel like he really sank the public option at that point. He has a lot of the insurance industry in Connecticut where he lives. And you mentioned this already, and it's really important to bring up again. The Clintons failed because they couldn't get the buy-in of all the different industries. Obama succeeded and Democrats succeeded because they did get the buy-in. They got the buy-in of pharma, of hospitals, and especially of insurance companies who are going to get a whole lot more customers. It seems like the only constituent they didn't get a buy-in from was the tanning salon companies. I mean, the point being, And the really important point is it was actually paid for. It was paid for. It didn't increase the deficit. But most importantly, it got all these special interests on board, which is it may not be sexy to listeners, to voters, but it's the hardest thing in the world to do and have such a comprehensive plan. They got it done. And then again, to fast forward to Trump and Paul Ryan and repeal, they didn't get anybody on board. And all of those special interests sank what they were trying to do with repeal and replace, because they had no buy-in from the special interests. So how important was it that they got all of that buy-in, and how important was it that Trump and Paul Ryan and others couldn't to repeal it?
Yeah, well, it was absolutely critical, and it started long before 2009. People like Kennedy and Baucus, and there are groups out there, sort of advocates for healthcare. There's a guy I talk about in the book named Ron Pollock, who was very instrumental in this. They spent years sort of having these conversations. They'd meet in hotel conference rooms, and then eventually they met in the Senate, and it was the drug makers and the device makers and the insurers and the labor unions. And they get everyone together, like, can we come up with a consensus model? And they were able to get most of them on board. The insurers never actually agreed and actually lobbied against it at the end because they weren't happy with how it came out. But the model was designed to accommodate their concerns, some of which, by the way, and to be very clear, in the case of the insurance companies saying, their big thing was we need an individual mandate. That is a lot of economists agreed with that. I mean, that was sort of conventional wisdom back then. And you can still, that's a whole other argument whether it really was essential or not. They got the insurance, they got the stakeholders on board. That was essential to passing the law. Now, there was a price to that. Pharma has lots of power. Pharma wasn't going to give up more than it wanted to give up. And so, they had to go pretty easy on pharma, relatively speaking. I mean, a lot of Democrats, people like Henry Waxman, again, who's former congressman, was, liberal crusader. He really wanted to go after pharma harder. He wanted to, in his ideal world, the government would have been negotiating prices with the drug companies, which is still something we talk about doing. This thing that happens in every other country in the world again. Couldn't get that, but at least wanted to sort of, find ways of paying them less through the Medicare program, not giving them too much exclusivity on new drugs. There's a whole list of things that he wanted to do. And basically pharma was like, you do that, we're out and we're going to fight you. And they used to walk around. Pharma, had a big slush fund ready to go. They could have spent that money fighting the Affordable Care Act. And they spent that money against the Clinton plan and they won that time. Chances are good they would have won this time. So, by getting pharma in the tent, there was a saying, actually, where there are two sayings. There's on the menu or on the table, or in front of the bus or on the bus. The idea was you deal, the groups, I think, were scared enough of what might happen that they were willing to negotiate, but they weren't willing to negotiate that much. Getting them on board was essential to passing it because, just imagine the hospitals, for example. If hospitals were angry at this bill, hospitals, almost every congressional district, the single biggest employer is a hospital. And the people who are on the boards of hospitals are like, the elite, who are the same ones who give money to the congressman. And I promise you, every single member of Congress can tell you every hospital in their district. And if the hospital CEO walks in and says, this thing's going to run me into the ground and I'm going to have to close my emergency room, I'm going to have to lay off workers, that member of Congress is going to run away from that bill. So, they had to get all these people on. Also the same reason why the VA has such a hard time changing, because their hospitals are also in rural areas and they're set up for 2 wars ago. But if they were to close a hospital, there's so many people that would lose it. So that's a very hard thing to reform the VA because of the point you just made, too. Sorry. That's what I've heard. No. That's right. It's very, very hard to change that. The cost of that, though, right? I mean, making a deal with pharma, well, now, you're not really doing as much as you would like to lower drug prices. And by the way, you're giving insurance to people. Now it's going to cost that much more because you're paying a lot of money to the drugs that these people are, you're paying a lot of money for the drugs these people are going to buy. So every one of these deals had a plus and a minus, right? The plus was you got these groups supporting it. The minus was now you have less money to play with. And that gets back to what we were talking about a little while ago, which is that, okay, you can only spend $1 trillion on this thing in the first 10 years. You can't get more money from the drug industry. You can't get more money from the hospital industry because politically you've decided you can't do that. Well, now you're going to end up with a bill and a law that's just not going to help as many people as you want to help, or it's not going to give people as much help as you want to give them. So there was a back and forth to that. But as you said, if you zoom ahead to the repeal fight, whatever the pros and cons of it was, the Republicans did not do that work leading up to 2017. And so when they unveiled their bill to repeal it, every one of these groups, the hospitals, even the insurers who had frankly, kind of fought the Affordable Care Act, they all just lined up against what the Republicans were doing. And they were screaming it from the rooftop, like, do not do this. And I think, when you look at what Republicans did wrong, why didn't Republicans get their health care bill across the finish line? Well, part of it was they didn't do the prep work. And a big part of that was they did not work with the stakeholders.
Well, easier said is because there was no possible bill. There were no policy solutions that would have still covered people. I mean, Donald Trump tried to sell like it's going to be the greatest, it's going to be the best, everybody's going to have great coverage. And Republicans in Congress are like, wait, what are you talking about? We don't even believe in universal coverage. Let's be clear. But there was nowhere to go is the understanding. They repealed it 700 times knowing that it would never actually get repealed and they wouldn't be blamed for it because Obama would veto it. Then, surprisingly, Trump wins. They take back the House and the Senate. They can do it. And then John McCain saves the world. Well, before I get there, though, just a quick question. I always say this, and I want you to correct me if it needs any correction here. Obamacare was the best plan we could get for access, affordability, and quality based on the political makeup of that time. There was no way to get a public option or anything more robust. They just didn't have the votes. That's what I often say. That's my understanding. Was there any other scenario in which you could see that anything could have changed given the Senate makeup at that time?
It's very hard to see. I mean, I was trying not to be totally definitive about these things. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, but it's like Obama didn't try hard enough. He didn't have drinks and this and that. And it's like, I just don't know. I mean, hypothetically, what could have been done? What he didn't do, what they didn't do.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you can look at any one of their decisions they made, strategic, substantive, you can second guess, and you can make a decent case on a lot of them. I mean, you can talk about the fact that, maybe they could have pushed a little harder on the drug industry, right? The way they managed the interest groups, they paid a lot of attention to working with the stakeholders. They didn't have a great, they sort of took the progressive movement for granted. And there's a history, and even just kind of coming into office, I think there's a progressive critique that I think, has some merit to it, which is that they built up this movement to elect Obama, and they didn't do a great job of translating that, or allowing it to become a kind of movement that could push legislation along. So, there's room, I think, to second guess various decisions. Can you imagine them moving the needle a little bit? Sure. But not dramatically, which is what you were saying. I mean, the way I put it is it's very easy to imagine a much better version of the Affordable Care Act. It's very hard to imagine a much better version of the Affordable Care Act passing that Congress. You really got to rewind the history back like 15, 20 years and create an entirely, if you're going to play the game of alternative universe, you got to go way back 20 years and build an entirely different political universe that Obama and Pelosi and Harry Reid are operating in. Yeah.
I've played the game of alternate universe, and I lose an hour of my life because it seems like a waste. All right, so then getting to John McCain, as I said, I mean, you opened the book with the thumbs down moment, and again, is my understanding correct that the House had repealed Obamacare? Trump promised this, and that he would replace it with something better. The Senate was one vote shy because John McCain, of all people, who campaigned on repealing it at the last second after surgery in the twilight of his life, facing, I think probably he knew at that point he didn't have long, and he gave a thumbs down. And to me, all of my hatred and disdain for so much of what John McCain had done and said was dissipated in that moment because he saved, in my opinion, the health care for my family, who is now on it, and millions of other Americans. But maybe I'm giving that one vote too much credit. I mean, consequentially, is that what did it?
I mean, it feels like that. Look, we can, we don't know what would have happened if he had voted yes. The bill they were actually voting on at the time was the, quote, skinny repeal, which didn't have much to it. But the theory was that would get you to a conference committee negotiation between the House and the Senate, and they would have worked something out. It was seemed clear to me, I think, the impulse to repeal Obamacare had such power in the Republican Party. It had so much money behind it by that point, and all the right-wing groups. And Trump was just so agitated and so determined to do this. I always, look, I can't see into the man's brain. My own feeling is that this was as much about erasing Obama's legacy as it was any substance. I mean,
well, it was one moment that was extremely clear when he suggested publicly something about healthcare that had nothing to do with healthcare and something to do with auto insurance. I forget what it was, but he never had any interest or understanding of how any policy worked, but especially something as complex as healthcare.
Yeah. I always wanted to, among this, and I'm not the first one to say this, but I always wanted to be able to go to a press conference and say, can you explain the difference between Medicare and Medicaid, just to see if he knew what it was? No, he didn't have any. He had no. I mean, I think that's clear. And I think people around him knew that. I think had that passed, I think they would have come up with something. It's hard to say how dramatic it would have been. I think there would have been some pressure to pull the House bill back a little, make it a little less radical. There were clearly senators voting yes on the skinny bill who had misgivings for various reasons. Just to take an example, you had, Rob Portman from Ohio and Capito from West Virginia. These are states being ravaged by the opioid epidemic. And the idea of a program, a repeal bill that cut Medicaid funding would have really decimated those programs. Now, on the other hand, is, they voted yes on earlier bills in part because McConnell said, we'll just throw some extra money at opioid programs for a while. And they're like, fine. So, I think they would have gotten something through. I think they would have signed something, and I think McCain having his moment of this isn't how, I think we should do this was pivotal. I mean, remember his objection, and I take it at face value, what he said, it wasn't so much the impact of repeal that seemed to really bother him. It was the way the Senate was going about it. And I think that did matter to him a lot. I think he is someone who actually cared about the Senate as an institution and was not pleased that this thing was being rammed through. Whereas I think for some of the other two Republicans who voted against it, Murkowski and Collins, I think they also didn't like that, but they also had more substantive concerns for their constituents.
Very nuanced answer to that question. Thank you. All right. Finally, what do you think the pandemic has laid bare about the American healthcare system that might influence the conversation moving forward, that maybe without the pandemic killing, in the end, it'll be at least 500,000 people, if not more, in just over a year? What have we learned collectively that has changed the conversation about healthcare in America, health insurance, that you think will potentially allow Democrats to get something done?
Yeah.
On healthcare, improve on Obamacare, I guess.
So I would say, obviously, hopefully, it makes people recognize the importance of medical care in general. I think that's probably true, because it's a pandemic and we see people needing health care. I think it has highlighted where there's work to be done. We have a lot of people who don't have insurance. We have people with insurance who can't pay their health care bills. We have people who are just living in a state of confusion over, and it's just not, this is no way to run a healthcare system. And I think, that this has held up a mirror to the inadequacies of our healthcare system, even after, the Affordable Care Act's passage, and made a case for things, for we need a system that's simpler, among other things, not just more generous, but just simpler. I mean, just something that's easier to operate, and if you keep going down that road, you are going to end up with something that looks like one of the national health insurance systems overseas, which could be, Medicare for all or something similar to it. So I hope those lessons are there. I do hope there's one other lesson, and I feel like this is important to say always, which is that you talk about the Affordable Care Act, you can spend a long time talking about what it hasn't done right and the inadequacies, the people who still, are struggling. We have so many people who still struggle with medical bills. And you look back at the decisions and the compromises, and some you're like, couldn't we have gotten a little extra money in there? Why did we have to get rid of the public option? Why did Max Baucus take so long negotiating with the Republicans? And, like I said, I think you can make a solid case for any of those critiques. I do feel like it's important to recognize that in this country, that's, we never pass a perfect reform. Social Security left out whole categories of workers. Medicare had huge out-of-pocket costs. The Affordable Care Act is a flawed, compromised program. It's also made the difference of life between life and death, literally, for millions of people in this country. We have evidence of that now. There's been research. People are healthier, and they're so much more financially secure. The idea, and it's changed the conversation. I mean, Republicans are still, conservatives still want to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, but you'll notice they don't say that as much anymore. And they certainly don't say, they've been, I'm going to protect people with pre-existing conditions, and I'm not going to take, Medicaid funding away. And that's a huge, that's how politics changes in this country. That's how the conversation changes. So, I mean, yeah, it's flawed. Yeah, it's compromised. Yeah, it's incomplete. It's no one's ideal. It's also so much better than what we had before. It's a huge accomplishment. And I hope people appreciate that, because sometimes, if you're advocating for reforms, it's important to recognize when you did something right. And I do think, it's made such a big difference to so many people. I hope that doesn't get lost.
It's a great point to end on. And I just think that, most people's opinion on healthcare is based on their own personal experience with the healthcare system. And most people don't have that much experience with the healthcare system. And I mean, I just think that when we're talking about Obamacare, the most convincing thing to me, Jonathan, has always been this kind of, when you ask people how they feel about healthcare and what changes they want made, when Obamacare is explained, overwhelmingly Americans approve of all of that, what it does to regulate the health insurance industry, to spend your actual premiums on your health care, pre-existing conditions, which is one everybody knows about. When you explain it, people overwhelmingly love it. When you call it Obamacare or even the Affordable Care Act, they're terrified of it. But if you explain to the right-wing Christian evangelical QAnon, Kentucky cares, and this is what it does, but it's really Obamacare, they don't know. And I always have felt like that's the messaging war that Democrats always struggle to win. And I defend them because it's harder to message in a more nuanced way in the language that we speak, and it's easier to demagogue and scare the shit out of people. But isn't that the final point? Don't Americans overwhelmingly approve of most of the reforms that Democrats want when they're explained unattached to the demonized messaging that has always worked to scare Republicans that would benefit from these policies away?
Yeah, I mean, that's been true since day one. With the exception of the individual mandate, which was never popular, and one or two other things like that. Everything is very popular. People will support that. You'll find people want to go farther, right? My out-of-pocket costs are too high, and, we'd like a public option. But in terms of what the Affordable Care Act does, absolutely. It's all very popular. That's, I think, ultimately why it's still around, because, that's what got it through and sustained it despite this long assault.
We've been talking for an hour, and I feel like I didn't do a good job because the book is so good. It's like a movie. You know what I mean? Like sometimes I feel like celebrities go on the Tonight Show to promote their movie, and it's like, stop talking about the movie, just show it. So all I can say is stop talking about the 10-year war, Pete and Jonathan, and go buy it, because a conversation about it can't do nearly the justice of the research and the writing with which you poured over. And all the relationships with all the people that you interviewed, so many, all of the players, really. So congratulations on an amazing effort. This is a book that every American, I think, should own, or at the least read. Thank you very much for joining me. I look forward to talking to you again soon. When I'm finished with this book, we can do a part 2, because there's a lot more to discuss. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
How about that? Jonathan Cohn at Citizen Cohn, the book, The 10-Year War, Obamacare and the Unfinished Crusade for Universal Coverage. I highly recommend it. Such an important issue. We've learned so much about it from Dr. Aaron Carroll and others over the years, Jonathan Cohn. This book, it explains it all. It's really important and interesting, and I can't recommend it higher to you, and I'm so happy that we got to have that great, big, long conversation. Okay, and definitely let him know that you heard him, please, because I'd love to talk to him on a regular, maybe monthly basis at least, because he's such a great reporter and understands the issue so well. So tweet him at Citizen Cohn, and if you get the book, tell him that you got the book as well, and that you heard him here on Stand Up. So, I don't know, maybe it was Sunday morning, Monday morning, I was on the Twitters, and I saw this video, this introduction video of this guy who I'd never heard of, who was running for lieutenant governor of Virginia, and his name is Sean Perryman. And I want to play the video, the audio of the video for you, and then I'll throw right to the interview. You got to see the video as well. But here is the audio of the video. Fascinating guy, and I think this explains a lot of it, even though you can't see it. Starts with him in his house getting ready to leave, calling his daughter, who shares a name with mine, Ava. Here it is. Sean Perryman running for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia. The introduction video on his Twitter at Sean Perryman VA. Almost 1 million views, by the way.
Ava, shoes, let's go.
I remember when I was her age. I didn't have someone's footsteps to follow in. My parents moved to Virginia for better schools, but realized the system leaves some of us behind. But the beauty of blazing your own path is you don't recognize the mud and sticks in the road as obstacles. It's just part of the journey. I graduated high school, became the first in my family to graduate college, became a lawyer at a big firm, thought I was on the right path until one day I was told I had to represent Donald Trump. So I quit. Leaving that firm was a sacrifice, but I realized that in order to make the system more equitable, I needed to follow the footsteps of leaders before me. I worked for my hero, Congressman Elijah Cummings. Instead of defending Trump, I worked for the team investigating him. I became the president of the Fairfax NAACP. And after the murder of George Floyd, we fought and we won, advocating for changes to the first responder system, forcing more data from the police, and changing the name of Robert E. Lee High School to that of the great John Lewis. Congressman Cummings once asked me, what feeds your soul? Standing up for what's right, fighting for equity, building a society where no one is left behind, and building a better world. For her, that feeds my soul. And that's why I'm running for Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah, so I saw that video, and now you've heard that video, and now here is my conversation with candidate for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia. It's perrymanforvirginia.com, perrymanforvirginia.com, and at Sean Perryman VA. Ladies and gentlemen, Sean Perryman. There he is, Sean Perryman, right now. Sean, I'm really appreciative that you agreed to take the time to talk to me here on the podcast. Welcome to Stand Up. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, P. I really appreciate being here.
Yeah, I loved your video. It got me. It worked. It really worked. It looked like it worked on a lot of people to introduce you to the world. And I want to now get a little bit more specific as you've announced your run for Lieutenant Governor there in Virginia about who you are and obviously a lot of the issues that you really are an expert on and can speak to. Where did you grow up?
Yeah, I was actually born in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. We moved to Virginia for the first time at 7 years old. I moved right out here in Manassas, Virginia, which is part of Prince William County, and spent most of my elementary school days here. And then when we went back to Brooklyn around junior high school, and then stayed there through college, and then eventually my parents retired to Virginia. So I've been back and forth between New York and Virginia, but this is home and has been for a while.
Where'd you go to school, and what'd you learn?
I don't think I learned anything, but I went to Bronx High School of Science, went to Baruch College as part of City University of New York, and then went to Vanderbilt for law school.
So you really are both a Virginian and a New Yorker. What does that even mean? I think there's a lot of people like that as well that have spent parts of their lives in different parts of the country. But how do you think your life experience growing up and spending a lot of time in New York and Virginia, what does it make you now, Sean?
Yeah, I definitely consider myself a Virginian now, but I think it informs how I look at things. I grew up in New York City during the stop and frisk era. And so, the people who say that the South is more racist than New York, I know that not to be true. And so it informs the way I look at these policies and the way I look at both areas.
That's interesting that you say that, and I'm sure that's everybody has their own perspective on it. Being a white person, I don't really have much of a perspective on where is more racist. But like, what kind of experiences did you have, or how did they differ in New York? I mean, people look at the Northeast or look at New York State or even New York City and say this is liberal, progressive, woke place. But obviously you can experience any kind of discrimination in different places. Was there a different type in different places? How do you compare and contrast?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. We moved to Virginia, like I said, when I was a kid for better schools. There was just a better school system down here. And so we felt in a lot of ways this presented opportunities coming here. Then going to New York, obviously a very cosmopolitan place. You can meet all sorts of people, have all sorts of food. But at the same time, growing up in New York City, especially in Brooklyn, you felt the police presence, you felt what that was like. And so it was interesting. I didn't feel as policed here in Virginia as I did in New York at times. So it's an interesting perspective. But then again, it was a very diverse area that I grew up in. But when I look at Northern Virginia now, it's super diverse as well. Not the same as New York City, but very diverse.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about like the way that you view the demographic makeup of Virginia. It's a really interesting state. You get this part over here that's, very rural, this part that it has a lot more diversity, more urban cities, and obviously the economy. Virginia's a fascinating state, and then politically with the gerrymandering and so on. But let's just stick on your background a little bit more. When did you know you wanted to do in high school? I mean, that's a very good public school in New York City, that high school. But did you have any idea where you wanted to go career-wise with your life at all?
Not a clue. It was interesting for me because no one in my family had went to college. So I went to Bronx Science, which for those who are listening is a specialized school in New York. And it's, a bunch of eggheads. And I go there. And when I remember one of the early days there, they were saying, well, listen, when you're ready to go to college, you don't have to go to your mom's Ivy League or your dad's Ivy League. You could pick your own. And I was sitting there in the crowd like, oh, do they mean me too? Because I don't know anything about that. So it very much felt like I was a little out of place there. But, I was always good at tests and smart kid. But it was very much a system that was set up for a different type of kid.
So what was your experience then in high school and headed into college?
Yeah. So, I went to high school, graduated in 2004. So I went there. My sophomore year was 9/11. And I remember it very much felt like this period now because a plane had hit the World Trade Center. And everyone wanted us to go back to school like nothing had happened. And I feel like that sometimes in this pandemic, like, is anyone realizing what's going on here? So that for me was a really formative part of my life. And but, going there, I saw the different communities that people were coming from, the advantages they had. And it made me more interested in politics and policy because I always felt coming from my community in Crown Heights, changes would happen, but I would really have no insight on how they happened. And so that's around the time I started reading like the New York Times and the Washington Post and hearing about people who made these changes happen. And that made me kind of interested, like, how do you get to a position in life where you can control your destiny in that way?
What was 9/11 for you? Was it any kind of wake up call in any kind of way?
9/11 for me, on the day it happened, it felt so surreal. It felt like something you see out of movies. Yeah. I remember me and my friends talking about, it crushed any sense of stability or safety we had. Because, there were, at the moment in New York City, we were like, are people going to come out of planes and start attacking us? And we, like hand-to-hand combat. Like we just didn't know what was next. And then I think people also forget we didn't have that instant information system that we have now. So we were hearing, the Pentagon's on fire, the White House is on fire. It felt like everything was collapsing around us at once. So it was an incredibly scary event, but it put into perspective how important the global politics were to me. Some of my early internships were at the UN and the State Department. I think because I was so affected by 9/11 and wanting to know how could something like this that seems so far away impact me right here where I live.
What did you study in college?
In college, I studied political science and had a double minor in American Studies and Communication. So I was always interested in politics and policy in some way, I guess.
Then you went to law school?
Yeah, went to law school. That was, I mentioned reading those papers about how those people who were changing the world in some way and not understanding how, every time I did research into them, they were usually lawyers. And so I did a pre-law program at FSU, and they kind of convinced me that the degree is very versatile and then you could do anything if you got it. And so that's sort of the path I took to going to law school.
I think one of the real hooks in your video and in your biography is a turn that your life took not too long ago, where you were working at a law firm, and because you're a lawyer there, you were tasked with defending President Trump in a lawsuit, and you decided no thanks, and you left, which is really an impressive choice. It must have been a very scary decision, but we've been talking, a lot about your life and up until to law school. What happened between you going to law school and you ending up at that firm?
Yeah, between law school and the firm, I started practicing. I was a litigator for a number of years. I did everything. It's probably boring to the audience, but insurance coverage, FINRA litigation, and then just sort of run-the-mill business dispute. But I did them at big firms. And so that was really my career. And it's interesting because in hindsight, I see so clearly that I had gotten off the path I was on. I told you I was very interested in policy. I worked at the UN and the State Department. And then I had all this massive student loan debt that so many people have. And so I had to service that. And I was doing this corporate law thing. And I would go home and watch the news and be frustrated and pissed off. And, but still I had to bill hours, had to pay the student loan debts. And so that was sort of my life after law school. And that moment that sort of snapped me out of it.
It's hard to pay back those student loans as a public defender or doing, I guess, work that's more thoughtful, more meaningful, because you can't make the money that you need to make to pay back the loans to have an even decent lifestyle, which of course illustrates another issue, which I'm sure you have strong opinions on, the cost of college and student loan debt and so on. But so you're working at this corporate law firm and you get assigned to Donald Trump's case?
That's right. Donald Trump built a hotel that used to be the old post office here in D.C. And this firm helped him with the contract for that post office. This hotel is up now, the Trump Hotel in D.C. And the flagship restaurant was supposed to be by Chef Jose Andres. And so that's where all the trouble really begins. Trump infamously comes down that escalator and makes the comments about Mexicans and the Hispanic community. And Jose Andres says, no way, I'm not going to build a restaurant with this guy. And so Trump sued him. And he hired the firm that I was working at.
It's an interesting thing to do, to sue. That whole thing is not really probably common, in that you make some kind of a business deal and then the person you made the deal with says something horrific publicly and you're like, you know what, I don't want to work with you. It probably doesn't happen too often, but when it does, certainly the chef has a pretty strong case. But you get assigned to defend Trump's lawsuit and his hotel. He probably, by the way, paid more attention to that whole situation than anything else that he was supposed to be doing. But so what did you say? How did that go down? You said, I'm not going to do it. I mean, that must have been crazy.
Yeah, so Donald Trump was a candidate at the time, and they came to me. I think I have some suspicions why they came to me. There weren't many attorneys who looked like me at the firm. And they wanted me to essentially say that, his comments weren't that big a deal. And so I said, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't want to have anything to do with this case. I'll help with some research. I'll do that sort of thing, but I really don't want to. And I can't get too far into the details of the case because, obviously it was an attorney on it. But we basically hit it in pass where I was like, look, I can't do this and I have to walk away. And I remember very distinctly telling the partner there that this is not your run-of-the-mill case. I've represented people who have said racist comments in the past. And I know this because as an attorney, you get access to people's emails through the discovery process. I've seen all sorts of things. But this was someone who was a danger to our society. And I understood it at that moment. What he was doing, the thing that he was lighting, the fuse he was lighting here, was going to explode at some point. Now, I didn't think he'd become president, but I understood what he was doing was just fundamentally dangerous to our society, and I didn't want to have any sort of association with him.
It's interesting that you started in high school and wanted to become a lawyer for the reasons that you said, and you ended up in the corporate world. And I wonder if you would have stayed in the corporate world had Hillary Clinton got elected, because that fuse that you say got lit also got lit for you and a lot of other activists and people in general saying, I want to do something different. The world has suddenly changed overnight by the election of this crazy person. What can I do? And you decided what? What was it that you did next? So you quit the law firm, and then what?
So I quit the law firm. Again, he was just a candidate at that point, and it was sort of like, well, what do I do now? So I started calling friends and talking about, well, where can I go? I have these skills, et cetera. I was lucky enough to know a person who worked on the Hill, and they passed my resume along to the House Oversight Committee. The ranking member of that committee was Congressman Elijah Cummings. And I got called for an interview. I did a couple of those. And then eventually I met with Congressman Cummings, which was surreal because, he was this sort of larger than life figure. And I met with him right off of the House floor. He was just sitting in a chair. And I had done all this research, Pete. I had done, I know all his bills. I know everything that I'm going to say. I sit down and he goes, what feeds your soul? That was his question. That was his interview question. And so I had to figure out what to say to that. But his whole point, and he said it during the interview, was like, if you're here, you're smart enough to do the job, but I want to know what feeds your soul. And that was really what drove him, that sense of purpose. And it really made me reevaluate, well, what's my purpose? Why did I quit that firm? Why did I come here? What am I doing next? And then when Trump won the election, that was the sort of next iteration of that. What was next after that?
But what did you say to him?
When he asked what feeds your soul, I got to be honest, I was like a deer in the headlights.
Yeah, no, I can't imagine. That's why I laugh. As soon as you said it, I laughed because of that situation. I don't know how to answer that in the way you're thinking. I'm talking to Elijah Cummings. I'm not talking to some guy on the bus. So he's asking that question for a very specific reason. And I'm supposed to give an answer that hopefully is going to be impressive. Good Lord, what should I say? That's why I laughed. I laughed when you said that. I laughed out of nervousness for you in that moment or anybody in that moment. So what did you do?
And God knows how I phrased it at the moment, because I was sort of that exact reaction was my reaction. I just said that, I thought about why I quit the firm, and I said, it was my daughter. My daughter was 1 year old at the time. And I remember one day leaving the firm after having a very frustrating conversation about how I didn't want to represent Donald Trump. And I said, at some point, this kid is going to ask me what I do for a living. And if I have to tell her I work for someone like this, I'm going to feel like crap. And so I told him, it's my daughter. I want to create a world that she can be proud of, that she can feel accepted in, and that I can feel like I had some role in giving to her, and that makes me proud to do. And so I think that was my answer. It probably wasn't that articulate. It probably still isn't that articulate, but that was what I said.
How old is she now?
She's 6, and she's doing virtual kindergarten, and it's a challenge. But she's very proud of the campaign. She loves, you may have seen her in the video at the beginning.
Yeah, our daughters have the same name. She's very cute, and that's that was a great. The whole commercial takes us through your life and your career and your principles is really, really well done. The ad, but I mean that is also what got me. It wasn't necessarily that you have a daughter or that you had the integrity to quit your job when you didn't want to, argue on behalf of a white supremacist. It was that clip with you sitting behind Elijah Cummings. I'm like, well, who is this guy now? Now, hold on a second. How did you get involved with Elijah Cummings? And so you've just told us a little bit about that. So what a tragic loss, by the way, just always worth mentioning. I think that was shocking. I don't think most people even knew he was sick. I don't think it was public.
Even the staff, a lot of our staff, we knew he was struggling with some issues, but we didn't know the severity of how sick he was. And, the interesting thing about when I went to work for him, we all had this vision of what the world was going to be. When I got hired, it was because they were expecting the Republicans to do a bunch of frivolous investigations into Hillary Clinton. And I had defended numerous depositions. And so it was, you're going to be defending all these depositions for the obvious president, Hillary Clinton. And you can see how different the world ended up from the moment I was hired until what actually happened.
So what did you do for Congressman Cummings in his office? What did you learn from him personally, watching him, the way that he worked and behaved and treated people? I've heard a lot about him and his reputation. I never had the honor of meeting him, but I heard he had a certain way of treating people and talking with people. And so what was your experience? What did you do? What did you learn from him?
Yeah, I ended up being counsel on the House Oversight Committee. We were in the minority at the time. So we didn't have a huge staff. So it was, everyone was doing a little bit of everything. And so I did mostly investigations, worked for the tech portfolio, helped him with the investigations into Trump. And working with him was intimidating because when he was on, he was like, here's my stuff. He was really about it. But I was always just amazed at how he could navigate those relationships with Republicans. And we're not talking about, old school, sort of middle of the road Republicans. One of his best friends on the Hill was Mark Meadows, who ended up being Trump's chief of staff. And so he had this just ease about him where he got along with everyone. Everyone respected him. And it's interesting. As much as Trump inspired me, Elijah Cummings was such a larger than life figure. I almost felt like, I can never do something like this because this guy is, he is so benevolent, so wise. And so it was one of those things, but he really just had a presence about him, and the way he handled himself, I think he commanded respect from everyone.
Well, it gives you a lot of credibility being around someone like that. I think that's always true when you work on the staff of a legend, really. I mean, it says, well, this person, hopefully they took something from working with, in your case, Elijah Cummings. So, you then, I don't know if it's next. I don't know if I have your biography perfect here, but at some point you end up at the NAACP, and that's a really interesting and important position for you. How did you get that, and what was the work there?
Sure. And so that was while I was at Cummings' office. Like I said, when Trump won, it was like a bomb had hit. Everyone came into the office and was sort of dejected and everything. And Congressman Cummings had a conference call with all of us, and he said, we are about to engage in a fight for the very soul of our democracy. And it just sort of clicked that we have to fight back. We have to keep the norms that we have here at the federal level. But I started to think about my local community, and I was so frustrated being in the minority and on the Hill, and we could only do so much. We didn't have subpoena power. The Republicans were in control. So I started saying, what can I do in my local community? And I just went to an NAACP meeting and said, look, whatever you need me to do, I'll do. And it's one of those things when you go to a volunteer organization like that, you better be careful because they will actually take you up on it.
Well, I mean, especially when it's not like it's me walking into that meeting with no qualifications. Like, what am I? I'm a comedian. I'll host a benefit. You're a lawyer with a law degree working on Elijah Cummings' staff. So if I see you walk in a room, I'm like, oh my gosh, we just got handed a super talented, well-connected guy. Yes, we've got everything for you to do.
Yeah. And so that's how it went. I became the education chair and then eventually the vice president. And then the Fairfax County NAACP has been around for 102 years. And I was lucky enough to become the youngest president in their history. And, we completely rehauled that organization. I grew it from 400 members to around 1,400 in a year and a half. And so we were just out there taking on every issue. And it was really that energy that we saw was people so frustrated with what was with Trump and everything else that we just banded together and we made it happen.
It's interesting because I think there were a lot of good outcomes of the Trump election because it brought people together in I guess I'll say resistance, but in fear of in many ways of what he represented. I've always been trying to fight apathy by making boring issues interesting and talking with important people like yourself and making them interesting conversations. But I don't think that work was necessary any longer, because people were basically all of a sudden woken up. What the hell? We just elected the guy from NBC's The Apprentice who paints himself orange. I mean, what? And people kind of woke up. And so my next question is, what was the best thing that you accomplished at the NAACP outside of what you just already said? I think increasing the membership must have always been hard to do. So that's obviously hugely impressive because it brings that many people more into the fold. But what were you advocating for? And then I want to take us to, obviously, your campaign for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, Sean.
Yeah, so the NAACP, we had too many wins to count. We were really effective. And so one of the things, it was a symbolic win, but people say, oh, it's just a name. But I saw that breakthrough in our community. We had, here in Virginia, we're the former capital of the Confederacy. And right after the decision of Brown v. Board of Education, the high schools that were named directly after the decision were Jeb Stuart High School, which is a little known Confederate, and then of course Robert E. Lee High School, which is the granddaddy Confederate of all of them. And those were the two schools, and Virginia was in this thing called massive resistance for 10 years, where they would not let Black kids into their schools. And these were the schools they named after that. And they want to pretend it was a coincidence. And then in modern day history, the kids that were going to Robert E. Lee High School were Black kids, Black and brown kids, the majority of them. And so it was particularly perverse. And so we went in there and we got the name changed. And we not only changed it from Robert E. Lee, we changed it to John Lewis High School. But it was such Pete, I wish I could explain it. It was such an impossibility. Like, this was something in our community that was supposed to never change. And we changed it, and we changed it in complete 180. And then once that happened, we saw this breakthrough where anything was possible. So we did changes to the way that the police operate in schools, where we saw a reduction in arrests by 60%. We changed our first responder system here in the county, where mental health crisis counselors would come for mental health incidents. The way the police operated was different. We saw all these changes. We got more money added to the affordable housing fund. We had all these wins because, and I don't know if we can directly link it to Robert E. Lee, but it was like once we knocked down that wall, it became anything was possible.
Well, I mean, I can't imagine, because I've never been part of a movement quite like that. But I mean, I imagine if you get a win, much less an early win, early in terms of, I mean, they've been around for 102 years, but early in terms of, hey, if I just joined this organization and started fighting and I got a win, that is inspiring and motivating to keep fighting to get bigger wins. What is so hard about changing the name of a school at this point when it's predominantly Black? In terms of the community, I'm guessing, who stands in the way? What were the obstacles of getting rid of the name Robert E. Lee in 2000 and where we're at when you get it done?
So the school itself was predominantly Black and brown, but the school board was not. And this was something that was it's going to rip the community apart. And,
that's what they said. That's what they said.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And why don't we leave good enough alone? And this wasn't named for racist reasons. And, it was every excuse under the sun. And then, when George Floyd died, we had already been in the process, but then it sort of, it motivated people to see, well, this is this obviously racist thing that we have here that we can no longer pretend isn't racist. So, yeah.
That's it really is an amazing win, because it's more than just symbolic. It means a lot. So you're now running for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, and I've read a bunch of interviews with you and where you stand on policy, and you clearly understand so much about the issues. But why this office? Why Lieutenant Governor? Doesn't seem like there's a lot of inherent power with that position, and you seem to keep making gains in your career and being able to influence and impact change. Why do you want to be the Lieutenant Governor of the weird state of Virginia? That's my experience. That weird is entirely from my experiences in Virginia. They're mine. That's where I got the word. You can defend against it and insult me back if you'd like.
No. And I think politically, Virginia is weird. We don't have any contribution limits on campaign finance. Our governor only serves one term. The governor and lieutenant governor run separately. These are all things where I tell people, and they're like, what? So, but no, the reason I want to run for this office is Virginia is unusual in another sense. We have 3 statewide elected officials. And as an advocate, I had been pushing on issues like ending the death penalty and legalizing cannabis. And we, just like the Robert E. Lee thing, we met so much resistance. But once one of the 3 statewide elected officials said, this is something I agree with, we saw the momentum for it to make it happen. So this year, today, actually, we have ended the death penalty here in Virginia. That's huge. Virginia has killed more people than any other state in the country. We're moving towards legalizing. And that's because the statewide elected officials have come out in favor of those policies. So as an advocate who's interested in effectuating change, I started thinking, if I were one of the 3 statewide elected officials and I could push on these progressive policies, then maybe we could see the momentum to make it happen. Because as you said, this isn't an inherently powerful position, but we've had lieutenant governors who've been influential like Doug Wilder and Don Beyer. It's a position where if you're doing more than just waiting to become governor, you can get some stuff done.
Well, what I also meant by weird about Virginia is it's how gerrymandered it is. And it would seem that if you looked at the votes and you looked at the data, Virginia's would be a blue state. But because the way that the districts are drawn, you end up having a jacked up state house and send some weird candidates to the national government. So what about that? I mean, that's why you can run on a progressive platform, I guess, because the vast majority of people actually see what you want to do and say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We'll all win from that. Broadband, cannabis, early childhood education, all these issues that I'd like to get into more. I know we're running out of time, but is that the truth about the state? That's what I mean by weird in terms of the makeup.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. We've had Democrats elected statewide since 2009, almost the last 11 years or so. And the reason that is because you can't gerrymander statewide. So our General Assembly can be Republican at times, and that's because of the gerrymandering. But statewide, we see that the majority of votes go to Democrats. So now Democrats control everything because we have this overwhelming waves of Democratic voters. But this is the problem we have is gerrymandering here in Virginia. I think truly it should be considered a blue state. Obviously it is, but in a lot of ways, the people are nervous about what happens because of the gerrymandering.
All right, I want to end on one specific policy issue, and then hopefully we can talk again. But I saw that do you host something Wednesday nights at 7 of your own? Because I watched one of these episodes in prep, and I actually reached out to one of the guys that you were interviewing. You had on, the public defender. I think his name Doug Haywood. I think it is.
Brad Haywood. Yeah.
Brad, excuse me. I just literally learned about him in an email like an hour ago. So I learn a lot from talking to public defenders, and I wanted to specifically ask you about, what you're doing on Wednesday nights at 7, so you could plug that, and all the links for Sean are in the show notes. But of course, the website is perrymanforvirginia.com. But so my final question is, could you give me an example of injustice in our criminal justice system that you would like to work on changing? Because I think when people learn about the criminal justice system, the more they learn about it, the more they read about it, because most people aren't actually affected by it, the more outrage they get. So maybe just pick something here at the end to talk about in terms of criminal justice and what you'd like to see change.
Yeah, we have a room for a lot of changes here in Virginia. We don't have a real parole system. When I tell people that, they're shocked. Virginia doesn't have parole, and so that's a huge issue for why people stay incarcerated way past the time they should. But one of the issues I've taken up recently is ending disenfranchisement. I don't mean just when someone gets out of jail that they can vote again automatically. I mean, we never take the right away from them to vote. This is an issue where Vermont, Maine, D.C., most European countries, they never take away your right to vote. But here in America, we do it. It's a legacy of Jim Crow. It's a way of disenfranchising folks. We count those prisoners for giving resources to places, but we don't allow them the right to vote. And so this is something that I've been out there on, a little bit further out there on than most people. But I think it's an absolute critical justice issue that we should stop stripping people of their right to vote.
Well, I mean, I barely want to even put people in prison. I've read and learned so much more about it, how much more damage it does, how much of a waste of money it is, and how those human resources are also wasted when they could be doing so many very important things on the outside if we change the way that we thought about society. But maybe that's for another conversation. That being said, some people might say, listen, if you do the crime, you got to do the time or some bullshit like that. But they also might simply say, listen, if you committed a crime, you should have to, you lose certain rights as a result, at the least your right to vote. What would you say to the person, the moral argument against that is?
Well, I would say two things. One, that we have to decide what our prison systems are for, whether we're trying to rehabilitate people and get them back into civic society, or are we trying to punish them for the rest of their lives? Because right now, what we do for the most part is punish people for the rest of their lives, even if they serve their sentence. But two, I would say you've already taken away their freedom. They can't go anywhere. They're not hanging out anywhere. This is something where you're trying to get them back into society and getting them engaged in the civic process. What harm does that do? They're the most affected by the policies of the state. Why wouldn't we allow them the right to vote? What did they do that had something to do with voting?
I like that answer. I like all your answers. I really like talking to you, Sean, and I appreciate you talking to me, and I won't take up any more of your time right now, but I will harass you in the future. I know you got a crowded group of people that are qualified running there, so I'm sure it isn't going to be easy, but I no matter what happens, you're going to continue, I'm sure, doing great work and affecting change, which is the reason why I wanted to talk to you myself and introduce you to my audience in hopes that they'll look into your work and maybe support you. You can give them money. You can help them in any number of ways to change, I think, Virginia and the country. Perryman for Virginia.com. Sean, great talking to you. Thank you so much. I think I hung up on him. I think I just edited off his goodbye and thank you. Oops. Sean Perryman, everybody. I thought that was great. I really enjoyed him, and there's a lot of really interesting candidates running for that office, but his ad got me, and he's a real smart guy with a lot of integrity who quit his high-powered job at a law firm. I always, when I see someone do that, I always have a lot of respect for them, because it's not an easy thing to do, to leave your great-paying job, which provides your life with a lot of comfort, because of a principle, because of your own integrity. And so when I see it and I hear it, I'm always impressed by it, because that is a person who is trying to be the change that they want to see. And that's certainly the code that I try to live by. Fall down all the time, but that's the goal. Well, that is the show. Thank you very much for joining me here on Stand Up today. Thank you, Jonathan Cohn. Thank you, Sean Perryman. And thank you to everybody who listened to both of those interviews. I mean, we're over 2 hours. Don't usually do that, but I had to throw these both on because I've got a lot of great guests joining me in book this week. That's the power of the show. I hope you can support it with a paid subscription if you haven't already. And just go to patreon.com/Pete Dominick, or the paid subscription link in the show notes. And now I want to throw it to singer-songwriter who wrote this song just for us. It's John Carroll with Stand Up, everybody.
Sunlight, you gotta stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. You got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand up.
Hello, show enders. Today's show ender comes to us from First Coast News, firstcoastnews.com, where a woman lost her wallet at a Jacksonville Walmart and a Good Samaritan drove to her house to return it.
When the doorbell rang at Deborah Crosby's Yulee home Saturday night, a special delivery was waiting.
Camera recording.
Hey, how you doing? I found your wallet at Walmart.
This man, who Crosby calls her guardian angel, was there with some good news after some bad luck.
I'm like, my God, this person went out of his way.
Crosby dropped her wallet in the parking lot of this River City Walmart in North Jacksonville. She did not realize it until she was checking out. Anxious, as anyone would be, she began to think about what it would take to replace all its contents.
And I'm going to have to replace my military ID, my driver's license. I'm going to have to take off work because they're not open during, hours when I get off.
But as she was driving home, a notification pinged her phone.
Hey, Miss Crosby.
Someone was at her door. Strange, she thought. She wasn't expecting company.
I get there and the wallet along with the credit cards, everything are there.
The man, who did not identify himself, explained he was returning her valuables. It's about a 20-minute drive, Crosby thinking he could have turned around at any time.
Concealed it, gave me a message of where he found it, and I thought that is a lot of above and beyond.
Crosby is a science teacher at Yulee Middle School and wants to use her experience as a lesson plan in kindness, an element of generosity no textbook can teach.
He makes me so proud. I have 3 sons of my own, and I hope they would do the exact same thing.
In Nassau County, Robert Bradfield, First Coast News, on your side.